Peace talks collapsed. A fragile ceasefire, now on life support. And halfway around the world, and in the corridors of Beijing, Chinese strategists are watching every single development with barely concealed satisfaction. This is not just a story about Iran. This is not just a story about bombs and air defeats and failed diplomacy in Islamabad. This is the story of how one war, 6 weeks old, may be quietly dismantling 20 years of American strategic positioning in Asia. And what happens next could change the balance of global power for a generation. Beat drop. Music shifts to tense underscore. Part 1. The talks that fell apart. Saturday, Islamabad, Pakistan, a city more accustomed to hosting quiet back-channel negotiations than headline-making diplomatic failures. Vice President JD Vance, leading the American delegation, walked out of those talks and delivered a message that sent shockwaves through every military and foreign policy briefing room from Washington to Tokyo. Iran had rejected Washington's proposals, full stop. The fragile 2-week ceasefire, brokered painstakingly by Pakistan, in effect since April 8th, now hangs by a thread. Pakistan's own foreign minister, Ishaq Dar, stepped to the microphones and urged both sides to hold the line, to keep the guns quiet, to not let 6 weeks of devastating conflict reignite into something even more catastrophic. But here is the brutal reality. When a ceasefire requires constant pleading to survive, it is already dying. And the war that ceasefire was supposed to pause? That war began on February 28th, when U.S. and Israeli forces launched what military planners designated Operation Epic Fury, nearly 900 strikes against Iranian targets in a single, coordinated campaign of staggering scale. 900 strikes. Think about that number for a moment. That is not a surgical operation. That is a restructuring of a country's military architecture by force. And 6 weeks later, America is still there, still committed, still bleeding resources, attention, and, critically, military hardware that was supposed to be pointed in an entirely different direction. Part 2. The assets that left Asia. Here is where the strategic picture becomes genuinely alarming, and where analysts in Taipei, Seoul, and Tokyo are quietly sounding the alarm in terms that don't make many Western headlines. The Pentagon, in the weeks since Operation Epic Fury began, has been conducting what can only be described as a strategic withdrawal from Asia. Not out of choice, but out of necessity. Let's walk through exactly what has moved. First, an elite rapid response force of 2,500 United States Marines based in Okinawa, Japan, trained specifically for Pacific Island operations. These are the troops designed to respond to a Taiwan contingency, a South China Sea incident, a North Korean provocation. They have been rerouted. They are in the Gulf now, according to reporting from Semaphore. Second, the USS Tripoli, an amphibious assault ship, a floating fortress capable of projecting marine power across thousands of miles, departed its base at Sasebo, Japan. It is now in the Middle East. Third, and this one should send a chill down the spine of anyone who follows Korean Peninsula security. Parts of a THAAD anti-missile battery, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System positioned in South Korea, specifically to intercept North Korean ballistic missiles, have reportedly been moved to the Gulf. Let that sink in. The shield designed to protect South Korea from North Korean missiles is now partially in the Middle East, at a moment when Pyongyang has been accelerating its ballistic missile program and deepening its military cooperation with Moscow. Kurt Campbell, former Deputy Secretary of State, one of the principal architects of the Biden-era Asia strategy, put it in writing in a recent policy note. His words deserve to be read slowly. He wrote that the war has sent the U.S. pivot to Asia, unquote, into reverse. He said that military capabilities patiently accumulated in Asia, an aircraft carrier, anti-ballistic missile systems, a rapid reaction, Marine Expeditionary Unit, have been vacated overnight to support Gulf operations. And then Campbell issued a warning that should be the headline of every foreign policy journal on the planet. These capabilities may not fully return even after the Iran conflict ends. Read that again, may not fully return. Part 3, the ghost of pivots. Past this has happened before, and the precedent is not encouraging. In 2011, President Barack Obama stood before the world and declared that America would pivot to Asia, that after a decade of catastrophic overextension in Iraq and Afghanistan, the United States would refocus its strategic energy on the Pacific, on China, on the emerging theater of great power competition that everyone knew would define the 21st century. You know how that pivot ended. It went largely unfulfilled. The Middle East pulled America back, again and again and again. Zach Cooper, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, warns that this time the damage could extend beyond troop deployments. Arms sales to Asia-Pacific partners could be affected. Production lines, delivery schedules, pre-positioned stockpiles, all of it gets disrupted when America commits to an active war in the Gulf. Cooper's warning is echoed across the strategic community. The United States will likely be required to maintain an elevated military presence in the Middle East long after any ceasefire holds, much of it redirected from the very region Washington has been trying to reinforce for 15 years. Part 4. Beijing is watching. And through all of this, one actor is observing with extraordinary attention to detail: China. President Trump's summit with President Xi Jinping, originally scheduled for late March, has already been postponed to May 14th and 15th, explicitly because of the Iran conflict. The White House confirmed the delay. The symbolism is not lost on anyone in Beijing. The Brookings Institution notes that when the summit finally does occur, the agenda will center on 3 issues: Taiwan, trade, and the broader trajectory of U.S.-China competition. These are not minor agenda items. These are the foundational questions of the next 50 years of global order. And America will walk into that room, into that summit, having just spent 6 weeks pulling carriers, Marines, and missile defense systems out of Asia, having just failed to close a peace deal with Iran, having just demonstrated, in vivid real time, that the Middle East can still dictate American strategic priorities at any moment. Analysts in Taipei, people whose very survival may one day depend on American commitment to Taiwan's defense, have expressed alarm. Analysts in Tokyo, whose country hosts tens of thousands of American troops and whose security architecture is directly tied to U.S. Pacific presence, are asking hard questions. The message that American military redeployments send to Beijing is not subtle. The United States can be drawn away from Asia by conflict in the Gulf. That is an extraordinarily valuable piece of intelligence for any power contemplating long-term strategic pressure on Taiwan. Part 5. The road ahead. So where does this go? The ceasefire in the Iran war is fragile. The peace talks have collapsed. Vice President Vance is returning to Washington without a deal. Iran has rejected American proposals. Pakistan is urging calm but has limited leverage. And Operation Epic Fury, 900 strikes, 6 weeks of war, has produced neither decisive victory nor durable peace. Meanwhile, the May summit approaches. Trump will sit across from Xi with an Asia strategy that, by the admission of some of America's most respected strategists, has been set back significantly. Military assets that were meant to signal resolve in the Pacific are in the Gulf. Allies in South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan are recalibrating their assumptions about American reliability. And Beijing, patient, strategic, playing the long game, is taking careful note of every single development. The question that military analysts are now quietly asking in think tanks and defense ministries across the democratic world is not whether this war has damaged American strategic positioning in Asia. That damage has already been done. The question is it recoverable? And the harder question beneath that one, the one that no one in Washington wants to answer out loud, is this: if a crisis erupts in the Taiwan Strait tomorrow, does the United States have what it needs, where it needs it, to respond? 6 weeks ago, the answer was yes. Today, that answer is considerably less certain. Watch this space, because the next move from Tehran, from Beijing, or from a ceasefire line that may not hold, could reshape everything.